MysteryWire.com, home of the unusual and unknown. From Area 51 to the paranormal, it's your source to the most vetted UFO stories and special investigations in the world. Take a journey into the universe of MysteryWire.com.
All right, here we go. Thank you for listening to this Mystery Wire podcast. I'm Duncan Phoenix, and this week is just me, for now. Most of this will actually be George Knapp speaking with two women that are making great headway in the field that has been dominated by men. But first, quick talk about what has become the story-making international headlines this week, the Utah Monolith. Now, if you're not familiar with this, earlier this month, some Utah state officials were assisting with a bighorn sheep count using a Utah Highway Patrol helicopter when one of them noticed something odd and shiny sticking out of the rocks in an extremely remote part of the desert. The group landed, got out, investigated, and found a large 10 to 12 foot tall, all metal, three-sided monolith embedded in the rock, middle of nowhere. At first, after the media put the story out, it truly was a mystery, but it didn't take long for people online to find satellite maps and share its location, something we have decided not to do for several reasons. We haven't shared the location mainly due to the warning both police and locals have put out, asking and telling people to please be careful if they try to find it in person. It not only requires an off-road vehicle able to drive some of the gnarliest desert roads in the country, but you also have to hike about a mile through the desert. And then there's the concern over traffic, vehicle and foot traffic damaging the delicate desert environment and possibly even Native American sites. Now, to date, the real story of who placed the monolith there and why and how has not been uncovered. We suggest just go to MysteryWire.com and enjoy the strangeness of the Utah Monolith from your couch. Now, back to this week's guests. George is speaking with Shannon LeGro and Tracy Austin. Tracy Austin has been investigating UFOs and alien encounters since the mid-90s and has since branched out into paranormal encounters. She has her own radio show, appropriately called The Tracy Austin Show, and has written several books on the topics, including a new book about to be released by the end of the year that she and George will talk about in a few minutes. First, though, George is talking with Shannon LeGro. Shannon LeGro has been investigating Bigfoot, UFOs, and all things that go bump in the night. She also has several books out, produces her own radio show, and the podcast called Into the Fray. So here's George with their interviews.
Well, Shannon, it's great to finally get a chance to talk to you on Mystery Wire here. You live in Las Vegas, right? You travel around, but you live in Las Vegas.
I sure do. I actually grew up here, and I'm back. I did a couple different stints in Seattle and then, of course, Ohio, and that's where I really caught the Bigfoot bug. As you know, I'm really into Bigfoot and got to do some research out there, but I've been back here for a number of years now, about 5 years back in Vegas.
Makes you wonder, what's in the water or the soil in Southern Nevada. Art Bell, John Lear, Robert Bigelow, Harry Reid, Bob Lazar, me. I mean, it's all you. What is it?
I'm not quite sure, but I think your one of your opening lines from Coast to Coast is just all too fitting. It's just our not so humble home, and maybe we all just kind of draw that into us and take that energy. And maybe I don't know what it is though, really, but I'm a proud flag waver of kind of just anything strange and unusual.
How did that start?
Well, for me, it started when I was around 12, and I didn't really pursue it as far as talking to other people until I was in my late 20s, early 30s. But I had a sighting when I was 12 at my dad's cabin up in Duck Creek, Utah, which you may be familiar with that. A lot of Las Vegans are. It's about 4.5 hours from Vegas. It's a nice little spot to retreat to. And it's up in the mountains in Utah. And a couple of things that we used to love to do, if we weren't fishing, we were riding our four-wheelers when we were kids. So I would go out frequently with my brother and my stepbrother. And on this particular day, it wasn't very smart to do, but my dad was down in Cedar City, and I decided, it's a nice day. I'm just going to ride without my helmet. And that will come into play once you hear what I saw, because if anybody knows riding with a helmet on and goggles, it can impede your vision quite badly, except for what's right in front of you. So anyhow, I'm riding on my four-wheeler, and the way that Duck Creek, especially up where the cabins are on the hill, are set up, they're all dirt roads, and it's in a grid pattern, so you can move quite quickly through there. It's not a lot of traffic, but I was hanging back because I didn't want dust in my face. I didn't have my helmet on, nothing to stop the dust from coming in my face. So I'm hanging back from my brothers, and I couldn't really guess at the speed that I was going, but I was moving pretty quick on my four-wheeler, something we love to do. And I look off to my right, and in the woods, probably, I'm guessing, not the best judge of distance, but about 30 yards into the woods, there are four pitch black, what we now would call is shadow figures or shadow creatures, whatever you might want to label those things. And I instantly knew in a split second that they were extremely strange. I knew this. My 12-year-old brain is going, what in the world is that? And they're actually paralleling me and running in the woods the same direction that I'm going. They're not interacting with me. I've always said that would probably make for a very different experience. I wasn't frightened. I was just extremely shocked and confused. And I watched them for about a 5 count. Then, of course, I'm still riding on my four-wheeler, so I have to check my path. And after about the count of 5, I check my path. I'm fine. I look back. They're completely gone. So it was really just those 5 seconds, and I got bit by the bug. Again, it was a dormant bug for quite a number of years because, to be honest, my dad got back from Cedar City, and I immediately had told my brothers, hey, I want to go back to the cabin. And like, what's your problem, Shannon? Like, we just got out here, It did frighten me for a number of days, and I was confused by it. And I told my dad, and he still remembers this actually, which is pretty funny. I told him, and he said he's ex-military. So he goes, oh, they do military operations out here all the time. Don't worry about it. It's just guys in, suits or whatever. And I'm going, no, Dad. Yeah, exactly. I'm like, no, Dad, you don't understand. And it's funny because, like I said, he still remembers that. And he goes, still to this day, I don't believe, that he says, you saw something, but it was something of this world. But I wholeheartedly disagree with that.
Did your dad have some kind of experience at some point? Did I read that?
No, okay. No, he didn't. Yeah, I wish. If he had, maybe he's keeping that from me.
So so you have that experience when you're 12. Is there something else that triggers you to go ahead and do something about it later on?
I started to get into podcasts, and I would consume any and every podcast there was out there, whether it be just general paranormal, UFOs, Bigfoot, and hearing other people tell their stories kind of reawakened things in me that was really, truly something very anomalous that happened to me. And it was life-changing in a way because it made me realize there's other stuff out there just on the other side of what we can normally see and what we perceive every single day. So once I started to consume the podcasts, that's, of course, when I got kind of courted by Wes of Sasquatch Chronicles to come on his show and be part of his show as a co-host. And then when I left Sasquatch Chronicles, that's when I'm like, okay, well, I do love Sasquatch, of course, the subject of Bigfoot, but that's not even my inception into this thing. So I said, okay, well, when I go to do Into the Fray, it'll be multi-topic. And that was pretty much the inception of Into the Frays, because I could relate to listening to those people tell their stories and relive it every single time they did that. And in fact, the first time that I told it on a show, it was on Sasquatch Chronicles, and I was terrified. And I remembered, much like you've probably heard yourself, someone taking the breath, and they're pausing, and they're just trying to keep the composure, because when you tell it for the first few times, you're really sucked right back into those moments.
You do the podcasts, you write a lot, yet you're not tied into some niche. You haven't staked out territory. I'm going to be a Bigfoot person. I'm going to be a UFO person. You don't get into the kind of debates that happen in ufology. The ETs are from this planet. They're here to eat us. You listen. That's what you are, as a listener, right?
Yeah, exactly. A listener and I call myself a story collector. Now, I of course have gone out for the purposes of hauntings. I've even been to Fox Hollow Farm, the property of Herb Baumeister. I'm unfortunately usually the equivalent of bear spray when it comes to paranormal activity. I was there by myself. I even slept in the basement, and nothing happened. Nothing strange. I'm just not one of those people that's going to go, I was kept up all night by something, messing with me, and I saw the ghost of Herb Baumeister. I'm just not that kind of person. So nothing happened there. Um, that is not to say that is probably not an extremely active property, but I've been out for UFOs and for Bigfoot, and I just love listening. I love listening to people and being able to connect with them, and that's why I knew it was very important to keep the multi-topic side of things very open when it came to Into the Fray.
It's an interesting niche. When I started, there were very few women. There was Linda Howe, and that's it. She was looking at cattle mutilations and UFOs, and then her interest expanded. But there weren't many other women who were in the field. Now, with podcasts and social media, there are a lot more. But still, you're outnumbered by the guys, right?
Definitely. And I think that we're trying to fight back, and we're trying to kick our way a little bit more to the top and be more recognized. But absolutely, it is a very, very male dominated field for sure.
Is it harder for women?
I don't know that it's harder. Maybe depending on who might be watching or listening to your show, they might be a little bit more critical if they have certain opinions on, women in general, or if I crack a joke and, a man cracks the same joke, is it funnier if he says it? One of those kinds of situations, right? To where maybe no matter what you said, you wouldn't gain the graces of said person. And that's okay, because as we all know, there's going to be those that completely disagree with pretty much anything that you ever say.
Do you make a point to not take a stand on some things like Bigfoot? I know, as I mentioned, you're a listener, you want to hear all sides, but seems to me you've avoided kind of the traps that some investigators get involved in. They stake out a position, and then they defend that position for the rest of their lives. It's a flesh and blood. Bigfoot is an undiscovered ape, or he's an interdimensional, or it's a fiction of your imagination. I mean, you make a point of not getting yourself locked in?
I do. I make it a very staunch point not to do that. And it's not even so much that I'm against doing it. I don't even know that I have a desire to even impart my thoughts on either someone's, personal experience and their beliefs on it. I'll never have someone come on and say, I saw Bigfoot, get out of a UFO, and then it got out. I saw it. It went back into the ship, and I'm not going to laugh about that. And I'm not going to espouse that that's where the Bigfoot come from. Of course, they come from space, and they're here to mine gold for the aliens to power their ships. We have all heard that, right?
Everybody knows that.
Yeah. But so that's why I think it's so important to just remember your roots, and to remember that, I will never be able to explain what I saw. And that's what I have to keep in mind when somebody comes on and tells me a story that I might think is really far-fetched. One time I had a gentleman come on and say that he could remote view, and he remote viewed a location in England where there was a pond, and the beings, he found out what beings were basically a haunting type situation. It wasn't anything like ghosts. It was these little blue beings with razor sharp teeth in their heads, and they were living in the pond. Now, that's what he says he saw, right? So I'm like, okay. I mean, I'll never go, oh boy, well, I believe that can't happen. That's just not true. So yeah, the listening part, I think, is the biggest thing. And I don't ever want to espouse my beliefs on anything, because who am I nobody knows. Nobody's an expert in any of this stuff.
No, I was thinking the same thing. As long as I've been involved in starting with UFOs and then branching out from there, I know a lot more, but I understand a lot less. I mean, I don't know answers to any of this stuff.
Oh my gosh, that's the biggest thing right there. Is just the longer you're in it, you just get more questions, not answers. Never.
You travel a lot as well. I mean, you work with Seth Breedlove, who we interviewed from Mystery Wire a couple of weeks ago, and doing some great work. He does some great work on these films. But you're part of the production team for Small Town Monsters.
I sure am. I've been lucky enough to be friends with Seth nearly as long as my show's been on, about 6-7 years. I met him in Ohio. Funny enough, at a Finding Bigfoot town hall meeting taping is when we finally met. And yeah, we're going out, we're searching for UFOs. We did, of course, On the Trail of Bigfoot, which has the 2-part already out on Amazon. But we recently we're always laughing because we're like, we don't know how our merry little band of weirdos found each other. But anytime we go out, I mean, it's long days, it's a lot of work, you know how filming is, but we all just get along so well and we have so much fun. And the trips go by in a flash and we collect incredible stories. And my favorite part, of course, will always be talking to witnesses. And I just like to be able to actually go to their sighting location. We've done that a number of times. And seeing them recount that and point right to the ridgeline where it came over and right to, you know, the place where their car was parked. And exactly.
So you co-wrote this with Michael Hopf. Can you share a couple of the stories with us? I don't want to give everything away, but give our listeners a chance to figure out what you're covering this. There's a chapter you have in there called Robert. Who's Robert and what's his deal?
Oh boy, Robert, I will be interested to get you and your listeners' opinion on this one, because this is one of my all-time favorites, and I'm not supposed to say that I have favorites, but I do. You know, just like favorite kids, I have my favorite episodes. So Nick is out. This is some years ago, and actually I didn't, it wasn't a very long time ago, maybe 5-6 years ago. He contacted me really not too long after this happened, only a few years. And he and his friends they're going down to Florida for the quintessential spring break party time. And they're all staying in kind of a low rent motel. They don't have a whole lot of money. They're all staying in this little hotel room together. And the very first night they get a knock on the door, and it's a kid about their age. And he says, "Hi, my name's Robert, you know, can I hang out with you guys?" And everyone's like, "Sure, why not? The more the merrier," you know. They're doing their thing. And I don't know if it was the first night or the second night. I don't even know if Nick quite remembered this, but they're sitting down around the table in the hotel room playing cards. And at some point, and he had been getting weird vibes from this Robert kid for the second that he walked in the door. He said he just seemed weird. And he looked over, and Robert was looking right at him already. And he said his entire face changed. Not just his face, but like his hairline receded, the color of the hair darkened, his eye color changed, even the structure of his facial, like his actual bones changed. And it stayed like that. And he's kind of looking around to see if any of his friends noticed this. No one's reacting. So he's like, "Okay, Nick, just keep it cool. You know, you can't be like freaking out if no one else is noticing this." So he steps outside and he gets some air and he's like, "Okay, just be cool. It's all right. It'll be fine." The next day comes and he's kind of talking to one of his friends, female friends, that's also on the trip. He's going, "What is Robert's deal?" Like they both agree he's really well spoken. He kind of speaks in a way that seems like he's from another time. And he goes, "I haven't seen him eat anything or drink anything." And he made his face change for me. And the girl goes, "Well, that's really kind of weird, because Robert told me that he made his face change for you. And he did the same thing for me." And Nick was so stunned, he admitted that he made a mistake, because he goes, "So she was telling me the same thing, basically what I wanted to hear. I didn't press her on it." He was so like stunned, he just walks away. But one of the strangest things of this story is the fact that at some point he thinks Robert, at least he thinks Robert, right, is sleeping. Someone that doesn't eat or drink, do they need to sleep? Who knows? But he thinks he's asleep. So he goes in the back pocket of Robert's pants. He doesn't have a wallet. He has no ID, no nothing, markings of who he is, where he came from. All he had was a small little black book full of names. No addresses, no numbers, just names. And he says there's hundreds of these names in this little black book. I think to him, that was the point where he really, truly, besides the face changing, maybe he just attributed that to he's having a little too much to drink, a little too much party time, but now he's got something really physical, tangible going. What is with the book of names, Mr. Robert? The weekend ends and everybody leaves, but Nick admits he's like, I think about Robert all the time, and I wonder where he is and what he's doing. And of course, is Robert the same age? Has Robert ever aged? I mean, when you're talking about somebody that doesn't eat or drink anything for, a few days while they're out there the entire time, that's really strange.
So what category would you put that in? I mean, demonic?
Yeah, demonic, vampiric, maybe. That's been postulated. And actually, George, one of the strange things about that episode is the second it aired, I have birds here at my house. So I frequently get someone going, I heard a whistle, or I heard a tucking. And I'm like, well, I can explain that. I like to explain that away when I can. I got inundated with messages and emails when this episode, Robert, came out. And they said, you have to go to, I believe it was 32 minutes, 14 seconds. Every podcatcher is a little different with the timestamps, but I isolated it. And it sounded like, and in fact, it was right when I'm asking Nick, what do you think Robert was? And you can nearly as clear as day, and I'm not a huge fan of EVPs, but you can hear a voice say, vampire, just like that. It was the strangest, and I got inundated with it. And usually I'm like, you guys are just hearing something weird. As you know, artifacts can get tossed into recordings all the time. But this was actually pretty darn strange, especially with the timing of when I was talking to him.
Before I forget to plug the podcast Into the Fray, where do people find that, and how often do you put out a new show?
Absolutely, yeah. Every Thursday is a new show. Thursdays are around 6 to 7 p.m. Intothefrayradio.com is the website, and of course, any podcatcher, iHeartRadio, Spotify, and YouTube as well. All
right, and how's it doing?
Doing well. It's doing really great. I think, as long as you're still having fun with it, and you're learning new things, and it's still a passion for you, it's 100% worth it. I love doing this stuff.
I remember you mentioned about EVP, and there is, I forget which of the stories mentions EVP in this book. It may not be one that you wrote, it might be Michael, but so you have reservations about EVP, and explain what it is. It's electric voice phenomena, often associated or used by ghost hunters, right?
Right. And it's just the fact that I've heard so many things through my own recordings when I know that, a car went by, or, the little bird just flew over my house again here in Vegas, or, there's just strange things that can kind of always trickle into a recording. After you pull out noise removal and things for Audacity, and you can still hear clear as day someone talking over or under you or in between you and your guest, and it actually is in relation to what you were talking about, that's pretty strange. And in fact, I just got an email about, I think it was episode 260 that I'm going over. And it was, again, the same kind of a situation where I was asking the guest, well, what do you think that entity was? It was a haunted office space. And I said, I believe I said something like, well, did you think it was, something demonic or something? And there is a male voice going, no, it's not me. And it was even clearer actually than the vampire EVP from Robert. So I think when it's in direct relation to something that is what you're talking about, that's when I get pretty excited. But when you watch the ghost shows and things, if I hadn't gotten so much email and messages after the Robert episode saying, I hear the word vampire, and then there's more talking after that's neither here nor there, because I couldn't isolate that well enough. If someone had said to me first, only one person, listen to this, it says vampire. And then you go in and you go, oh, well, they said vampire, so now that's in your head, so you hear vampire. It's just the power of suggestion, right? But when I had just multiple floods of email coming, I'm like, okay, this is actually pretty cool, because it's not like I had gone on and in my next intro said, guys, the vampire EVP is in the Robert episode, go check it out. It was just cool because that seed hadn't been planted. It was people of their own volition coming from separate places to say that. So that's what made it that one pretty exciting for me.
Another chapter's in here. It's just has one word titled Boulders. And when I saw the chapter, I thought, oh, I need to look at this, because I've had these conversations with Dave Politis over the years. One of the criteria in his missing 411 cases is the proximity to boulders. And I was always kind of, how can that be? I mean, what could boulders possibly have to do with people disappearing? And he's come up with some stories about boulders that weren't really boulders. Now, what's this story about?
Yeah, and it's funny you brought that up, because that is the only reason that I released the boulder section of that talk. It was important, I think, to get that out, because the whole other part of that section was saved for the insiders. And the boulders, when he told me that story, when Chris told me that story, I was stunned. And the 411 is exactly what came to mind, just like it did for you. And he lived not far from a quarry field, and it was a massive swath of land, he says, actually. And he had gotten in a fight one night with his dad, and he needed to take a walk. His truck was at his grandma's, within walking distance, obviously. So he takes off to go do that. And it was just about full dark. There was probably some street light, ambient light going on. And all he knew is on his left is the road, on the right is the quarry, pretty much for most of the walk that he was about to execute. And he starts to walk, and he gets the sense that he is in fact being followed. He turns around, there's nothing there. Okay, weird. I'm going to keep going. Then he begins to hear clicking noises behind him. Turns around, sees absolutely nothing, but still gets the sense that there's something there. Okay, weird. I'm going to keep going. And then he begins to hear the clicking behind him, to the right of him, somewhere in the quarry, and then off to the left as well. And he now is surrounded by these really strange clicking noises. He says he likened it to the gods must be crazy, right? The way that they would communicate that way. He said it didn't sound animalistic. That's what it sounded like people clicking with their tongues. So he continues to walk, because at this point, the only place he knows it's not coming from is in front of him. But now something really strange starts to happen, as if that wasn't enough. He starts to get, he says, abysmally tired, to the point where he kept actually falling down and getting back up. And when you're talking about being followed, and I should preface this by saying, as he's walking, it's not just a feeling of being watched or followed. He felt like he was in danger. So for you to feel like, I need to sit down, I need to lay down, even though you're in danger, those things don't really line up, right? The adrenaline should kick in, and it should be easy to figure a way out or run, whatever you need to do. But he keeps fighting this feeling, even though he'll fall, he'll stumble, he'll get back up. I don't really know why he did this, and he probably can't even explain it either. He decides to go into the quarry field, and he sees a massive boulder in the middle of it. He says, I'm going to climb on top of it, and at least I can have a better, kind of a bird's eye view of what's going on out here, and maybe I can see what's following me. The entire time, he's up, he's down, he's tired, he's fighting this feeling just to go to sleep and figure out what is following him. He gets to the boulder, and astonishingly, he lays down and he goes to sleep. I was stunned when I heard this part, right? Like you feel like you're in mortal danger, but you had to take a nap right now. So he goes to sleep, and he feels like the clicking has, diminished. And he's like, okay, well, at least I'm at a high point. I can see everything. Goes to sleep. He wakes to something tapping him on the top of his head. His eyes, of course, bolt open. He sits straight up. He looks around. There's nothing there. The clicking starts again. So whatever they were, they're still there. They haven't gone anywhere. And in fact, came close enough to tap him on his head. Horrifying. That's on my no list. No thanks. And guess what, George? He goes back to sleep. He tried to get up, and knowing he's full well in maybe some serious danger and the thing came in that close, he goes back to sleep because he is just that tired. And I remember him saying, like, even in the midst of falling asleep, he could even hear shuffling in the brush and the clicking. Just really a horrifying situation for him. Couldn't fight the feeling though. And it was nap time again. He wakes up in the morning, the sun is shining, the birds are chirping, the clicking is gone. And he looks around to see if any evidence of footprints or, anything disturbed in the area. There's nothing. So on he goes to his grandmother's home, gets his truck, goes back home. To this day, because I asked him, because at first I said, well, maybe, you think this might be a Bigfoot thing. And he completely disagreed with that. He says this was, I don't know what, he's of the mind like myself. Like, I don't want to put a label on this. I don't know what that was. But for whatever reason, I was marked that night and they just wouldn't leave me alone. I asked him to explain the feeling of being that exhausted. He has no clue. He says, I had never been that tired in my life. And he was actually stumbling at one point, just fighting to get those few more steps to get away from whatever was following him. Very strange story.
Makes you wonder that, maybe he was just spit out and rejected and sent back and allowed to go on his way. And other people aren't so lucky.
Exactly. And, with him going to sleep, is that tantamount to people having missing time? Because technically he wasn't conscious. So he did have missing time because he didn't know what was going on during that time, right?
I just did an interview with an author. His name is Tim Marzenko, called Disembodied Voices, where he shares those kinds of stories. Might be somebody for you to have on your show. He talks about people being lured into the forest by voices that sound friendly, by noises. But all over the planet, tribal, indigenous peoples have places where they say, don't go, don't go there. There's something that lives out there. And if you go in, you may not come back. Check that out. It's very similar.
I will. Yeah. Thanks, George. Those are my favorite kind of stories, in fact.
One other question. We got to go in like 4 minutes. It's a timeline. So on Bigfoot, one of your favorites, do you believe that there's an undiscovered ape-like species out running in the forests, or do you think Bigfoot is something else, or do you not want to draw that distinction?
I want them to be flesh and blood, 100%. Do I discredit the stories that there's something kind of weird going on, much like we were kind of laughing about the UFO and picking up the Bigfoot after he's picked the gold from the land? I just think they are really bad to the bone at what they do. I call them the Liam Neesons of the woods, and I just think that we're so not adept at that world, and we're just loud and bumbling and stumbling out there, and they can probably smell us, let alone hear us a mile away, to be honest with you. So I'm of the mind that they're flesh and blood. It doesn't matter what I want, but I don't want them to be anything but, because I don't think that we'll ever figure it out. But like a lot of people say, do we really want to know? I mean, the chase and the hunt is just so fun. Maybe hunt is the wrong word when we're talking about Bigfoot, but just this study of it and the fact that it may just be that good out there in the woods to elude us. I mean, we can do pretty horrible things to each other, and I think they can see that. So,
Shannon, it's great talking to you. I think those stories whet the appetite, so people will want to check out your book. It's Beyond the Fray, Paramalgamation. I enjoy it. I'm still want to finish it. And I want you to sign this, by the way, whenever I can see you. And
I hope I can do that soon. Absolutely, George.
Please keep us in the loop. You got a lot of interesting stuff coming in. Please let us know what's going on.
I sure will. Thank you so much, George.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
All right. So now we're going to turn our attention over to Tracy Austin, UFO alien encounter investigator, paranormal investigator. Here again, George Knapp with Tracy.
So here we go. Tracy, I know that I had read that you had a UFO experience or a sighting in 1987. Is that your start down the road to being a paranormal investigator or chasing these topics?
George, it pretty much was. One fine day in 1987, right in the middle of London, I happened to have a UFO sighting, which was the first of many. And at first, I didn't know what I was looking at. And so I asked my partner at the time, could he see this through the window where we were staying as students in the city of London, because it was a crystal blue sky day. It was about 2 p.m. and we're just having a regular conversation. And I'm standing by the window, and actually it was a row of 9 windows. And I see this object in the sky, and it was a cone-shaped object. It was pointed at the top, and it was rounded at the bottom, and it was rotating as it was moving through the sky. And so I knew it was made of metal because of the way the sunlight was glinting off it, and it was moving very slow. And so he came over to the window, had a look at what I was looking at. He said, yes, he could see it, and said it was a UFO. And I said, well, what do you mean, a UFO? And he explained. And I said, well, wait a minute. You mean that this object is being piloted by someone from somewhere else, not of this Earth? And he said, that's right. It's come from another part of the galaxy, or it's either come from another dimension. And I was just baffled, George, by what I was seeing. And we couldn't take our eyes off this thing. And we watched it literally move across the sky in a anti-clockwise motion across the sky and out of view. And of course, I couldn't shut up about it. I had to tell everybody about it that day and that night, as you do. And we proceeded to go, I don't remember where we were going, but we were going on a tube station in London. And we came out the other end of the subway, and there is a guy selling newspapers at the entrance. And my partner says to me at the time, oh my God, look how UFOs on the front page of the Evening Standard newspaper. Now, there wasn't a photograph as such. I don't remember seeing a photograph, but we saw the headlines, UFO over the city of London. So we knew, George, we weren't the only 2 people to have seen it that day.
Heading down to the subway, there's 3 words you got to keep in mind. Mind the gap. Right?
I knew you were going to say that. That's correct.
So you said that was the first of many. You saw how many? You had a dozen other encounters?
I have actually, yes. And they've all been pretty much daylight sightings. One that springs to mind is when I lived in California. And this was in, let me see, it was November the 13th. I think it was a Tuesday evening at 6:45 p.m. And at the time I was married. So my husband at the time saw it with me. And we had just come from a friend's apartment. Actually, we'd just come from Jose Escamilla's apartment, the Rods guy, with the Rods phenomena. And I wanted to get home to watch the brand new show with psychic medium John Edward crossing over. And so we're in Studio City, we're at the lights, and just to tell you exactly where we were on Radford Street. So we've got CBS Studios on the right-hand side, we've got McDonald's on the left, we have a gas station on the right side, and we also have a bank building. And so we're waiting at the lights patiently for the lights to change. And it just seemed to take forever. And so my husband at the time said, oh my God, look at that plane. It's going to fall from the sky because it's too low and it's too slow. So I looked through the windscreen and I saw 2 white lights, bright white lights. And suddenly a 3rd light came on in the middle of this craft. And I said to him, this is no airplane. We need to pull onto the gas station and wait for this thing to come over. And sure enough, George, it was no airplane. It was first of all, as we parked our vehicle, we got the windows down on the car and we were literally hanging out the windows, looking up at the understructure of this aircraft, this spacecraft. And it was a diamond, an elongated diamond shape, black in color, and pointed at the front as a triangle form, and then boat-tailed at the back. And we, like I said, we were literally hanging out, looking at the understructure, the belly of this spacecraft. And it had what I can only term as a framework or piping that went around the entire craft, where you could see part of the sky from the piping to the solidity of the craft in the middle. And it had a formation of very, very cold white lights in V formation underneath it. So it literally stayed for about 8 seconds, totally silent, quite low also, I may add. And It took off in a movement that I say to this day, Steven Spielberg would even have a very hard time of, reconstructing how this craft moved. And it headed off over CBS Studios. So I said, well, quick, follow it. We've got to follow it. So we did. And we were up against red lights the whole time, the traffic lights, and we lost it over the LA River. So I said, well, we have to go back to the guard shack at CBS Studios and we have to ask if someone there had seen it, because after all, that's the direction it went. So my husband parks the vehicle. I get out, I go over to the guard shack, I knock on the door, and a female guard comes to the door. And she says, can I help you? And I said, yes, I hope you don't think I'm crazy with what I'm going to ask you, but have you just seen a very strange object flying over your building? And she said, strange object? And I said, yes. My husband and I have just had an object fly over our vehicle. In fact, I'm going to call it a UFO. And she said, oh my God, UFO. And she pulled me inside, gave me a piece of paper and a pen, and asked me to draw this thing. So as I'm drawing this thing, George, she went on to tell me that they wouldn't have seen the object because the property of CBS Studios is covered in trees, which it is. And she said, and our window in here is anti-reflective, so we can only see ourselves. So I told her what had happened. And then my husband came. We were making quite a commotion about what we'd seen. And then another male guard came up and asked us what all the fuss was about. And we told him. And he said, you know what? I believe you, because I used to be a pilot in Missouri. And we used to see these things very, very often. Not the elongated diamond shape that you've seen, but great big balls of orange light. And they would move over the mountain ridges, and they would stop stationary, and they would wait for us to catch up with them. And we'd be playing a game of cat and mouse like this over the mountains. So we never, ever could keep up with them. So he says, I believe your story.
So you've had several sightings, encounters. I don't know if there's any close encounters or closer than those. A lot of people wonder if these are just accidental or whether this intelligence, whatever it is, reveals itself to people for a reason. Did this set you on the path of becoming an investigator, author, writer about paranormal, supernatural stuff?
It really did, George. I did not go looking for it because my life was to be a classically trained musician. I trained as a concert pianist. So my day was always, 7-8 hour days of practice with my instrument. So that's the path I was on. So I didn't go looking for it. It found me. And I think, George, I'm not saying this happens to every musician, but certainly because of the sensitivity of being a musician and the way we deal with music and we try to interpret music, one has to have a certain sensitivity with that. It's a universal language. And so I think because of that did have some attraction to me. But then again, I also have a fairly intuitive side to me as well, and have done since a child.
How would you describe yourself? I know you're an author, because I've got a couple of your books here that we'll talk about. You do investigations. You go out and interview witnesses and things of that sort. Do you call it paranormal? Do you call it supernatural? Alien? Unknown? How would you label yourself?
Oh boy, that's a really good question, because no one has ever. I've had lots of interviews, but nobody's really ever asked me that question. I'm a seeker of the truth at the end of the day, and so I think there's so many categories to all of this. Yes, I want to call it paranormal. Yes, there's aspects of it that are supernatural. Yes, there are aspects of it that are unknown. So the unknown also incorporates supernatural and paranormal. So all of the above, really.
And you live here in Las Vegas, right?
I do.
What is it about Las Vegas? What's in the water? I've asked this before. We talked to Shannon LeGro recently, and of course, my former neighbor was John Lear. We had Art Bell was a longtime friend of mine. Robert Bigelow, Bob Lazar, Harry Reid, even me. I mean, there's a lot of us here that are interested in this stuff.
There are. I don't know what it is, George, that attracts people really to the Silver City, Silver State here. I only originally came here 14 years ago because I wanted to buy a house, and it was extremely expensive in California. So I headed out to this direction because I used to have a TV show in California. So I thought, well, if the TV show happens again, I'm right next door, and it's just a plane flight away. So that's why I came here. I didn't come looking for paranormal investigations or anything of the sort. So it was really to buy a house. And
that was a heck of a house here compared to what you could buy for the same money in LA. That's for
sure.
Absolutely.
Yes, absolutely.
You know, over the years, over the decades, my involvement with UFOs, the main players, the main researchers, the best known were always men. You had Linda Howe back in the beginning, and she was there, plunging ahead, very strong personality and intrepid investigator. Seems like now there are more women in the field. And how do you feel about that? I mean, I suppose that's true in just about all vocations, but I think it's especially needed in this field, people who have a certain sensitivity to these subjects.
Absolutely. And I think it's fantastic, George, to be honest, because it gives it a really great balance of, the male and the female, the yin and the yang, if you like, of investigating what's out there. Because I think women can give and do give a different approach to investigations. They do have a sensitive side to them. And I'm not saying that males don't, but in the majority, females do. And I was invited by a very dear friend of mine, Paula Harris, which I'm sure is a very good friend of yours too, back in 2012 to host the very first women's UFO conference in Texas, Glen Rose, Texas. So I was honored to be a part of that, not only hosting it for the weekend, but to also speak about my book, Alien Encounters in the Western United States. There.
Has it been daunting to bang heads with men in the field who want to dismiss you because you're a woman?
Not for me personally, no. And I think mainly for me, George, it's because I am pretty much a strong female. I'm an alpha female. And so I tend to think, my brain, I think, is wired more along the lines of a male, to be honest, than a female. I tend to look at things a little bit more, maybe more logically, or I don't know, but I feel that about myself. So,
you mentioned your book, one of your books, Alien Encounters in the Western United States.
Yes.
When did that come out? And give me your sense of, it has a lot of great cases in it, a lot of great stories with intimate details. What are they? Have you formed an opinion, or is it better to not lock yourself into a position on this?
I'm locking myself in on the position of this, George, because there is something at work here. There's something at play. There's something very strange going on in our society. And I wrote that book in 2012, and I wanted to write it because I wanted to, it's not a groundbreaking book by any means, other than I had my very dear friend, Dr. Roger Lear, write a section of it in there about alien implants and the fact how he came on board with all of this eventually, coming from a skeptical place to a place of absolute belief of these very strange objects that were suspected alien implants. And so I'm locking myself in on that point that, yes, it's very real. Something is going on. People do have these objects in their bodies. I was actually present for the removal of one of these alien objects that Dr. Lear so kindly he invited me to be part of it. And it was an airline stewardess who had, I believe she worked for American Airlines a long, long time ago, and remembers with her boyfriend back then, 20 something years ago, on a vacation in a hotel somewhere in California, I think it was. And they were told telepathically to go to the window. They didn't know why, but they look out the window and there is a disc with flashing lights all the way around it. And she said, and I heard this from the horse's mouth, this isn't hearsay or secondhand information. This is firsthand information. And she said, we saw the craft, and then all of a sudden we saw a ball of blue light pass through a closed window into the hotel room. And the next thing we know, it's morning. So we wake up, we start the day normal, we, start to have breakfast, and then suddenly it hit me. She said, and I said to my boyfriend, do you remember what happened to us last night? Because we were told to go to the window telepathically. We did. We saw a disc with flashing colored lights. And then this ball of blue light comes into the room, and then nothing. What happened to us? Well, he did remember it, George, and he was very fearful of it. And she said to me, in fact, that was the very last time she ever saw him ever again that day. She never heard from him ever again. But in the shower that morning, in her right forearm, she felt a lump. And she said, that's very, very strange and very odd, because I don't remember that. I don't remember having that before. And the fact that she could actually push this object up in her forearm, around underneath her skin. So she sees Dr. Roger Leir on a TV documentary some 20 years later. She kept it in her arm for 20 years, not knowing what it was, but she never had any pain from it or anything. Sees Dr. Roger Leir, and he invites her to have an interview with him, and they have a chat about what happened to her. And he says, well, let's get some x-rays done. Got the x-rays done. This thing was not metallic, as many of his other objects that he's taken out, removed, have been. This was biological, and it was in two halves. So it was like a clam, and it was creamy yellowish in color, and it had a black dark strip that ran down the middle of it. So the whole thing, just looked like a clam. And he said to her, do you want to have this thing removed? She did have it removed. And she said the same thing like everybody else when these objects are removed, that she felt a whole new sense of freedom. So, he took this object out, he kept it in a tiny vial of her body fluid, and he usually refrigerates it for 24 to 48 hours to make sure there's no change. There wasn't.
Without getting into too specifics, like all the cases, big picture. December 2017, we're coming up on the third anniversary of this New York Times story. New York Times does a story and reveals the existence of an ongoing secret government study, Pentagon study of UFOs, ATIP. We subsequently learned through our reports that there was a larger project called OSAP that looks at not only UFO cases, but a lot of other peripheral phenomena, very strange stuff that is often seen in proximity to UFOs. That program called OSAP. So the public has learned so much more. We've seen these videos released by the Pentagon that say these are real, they are genuinely unidentified. We've seen the creation of a UAP task force, the Navy acknowledging that it is studying this stuff. I mean, it's a new day for you and I, people like us who have been investigating this. Are you encouraged by it? Are you hopeful that 2021 will bring more information and a better understanding? Or are you kind of suspicious of what's going on and what the motives are of the people who've been releasing this information?
I think it's a little bit of both for me, actually, George. Yes, I hope that 2021 will bring some clarity to all of this and some understanding, because we have been visited for a very long time. Things have been going on for eons, and the government have been heavily involved. They've kept it secret for a very long time. I don't think they knew what they were actually dealing with at the time. And that's why the whole secret of the whole thing, I believe. But I think, I still don't think they have all the answers. I think they have some answers. I don't think they have all of them. But, we've been waiting, people like you and I have been waiting for disclosure for a very long time. And we've always been told it's coming. And, it's just around the corner. It never really has. It never really has.
No.
But in a way, it kind of has to the public. Do we really need our president, whether it's President Trump, who doesn't have much longer in office, or President Biden, to release information and tell us? I think we already know that it's here. So I don't think it's going to make much difference, really.
I think you're absolutely right. I mean, I think I know you're absolutely right. Those revelations that started with the Time story and all that's happened in between confirms that the U.S. government, the Pentagon in particular, takes this seriously, that these are genuine, legitimate unknowns. We don't know. And I suspect, as you do, that behind the scenes, they clearly have a lot more information. But I'm not sure that there is anyone that has the big picture and knows for sure what's going on here. But I'm encouraged that there is more openness now in discussing the need for investigation, something that started right here in Nevada from Senator Harry Reid, our longtime senator. I want to ask you about this shift from UFOs, which you've had personal encounters, into other phenomena, writing about other things, in particular about hauntings. So you have another book about haunted Las Vegas. Welcome to Haunted Las Vegas. Some really cool cases, intriguing cases. For example, hauntings at Nellis Air Force Base, which is pretty interesting because Nellis has a lot of history in the other topic we've been talking about. Is there something inside you that convinced you that these things, including the other topic we're going to discuss in a moment, are all related on some level?
I think they are on some level, George. Precisely what or how much, I don't know. But I think when we talk about most things that are unknown, it does fall into a category that they are related in some way. I don't quite know what, I just feel that it is. But yes, hauntings are very real, just as much as the UFO subject is. And I've had, again, not only personal experiences with UFOs, I've had a personal experience of a ghost sighting that was inside the Guildhall School of Music and Drama, where I studied as a musician. And again, I got to see that with my partner at the time, who I had the UFO sighting with. And it was headless. So, and she sat on the chair for quite some time. And it's the first time I'd ever actually seen a ghost. So my heart was pounding out of my chest. And I so badly wanted to speak to my guy at the time to say, hey, do you see what I see? But I didn't want to interrupt what was going on in the room at the time, which was a hypnosis session that was being demonstrated by two friends of ours. So we didn't want to interrupt that. And I think that's partly why she may have been pulled in.
Yeah.
Because of the hypnosis session.
Yeah. You did something to trigger it or draw it in. That's interesting. Open something up.
Right.
So it's not that far of a jump from investigating hauntings and writing about it to where your latest book is about near-death experiences. Consciousness has become such a buzzword in all of these communities that we interact with. And the idea that consciousness is the common link between UFOs, near-death experiences, poltergeist, maybe cattle mutilations, all these different things. But the thrust of, there's a lot of energy that I'm aware of going into near-death experiences, investigating in a scientific way, if possible, the continuation of human consciousness after physical death. Tell me about the book, I Survived Beyond and Back, what evidence you collected, and where you stand in terms of what you believe to be true.
Okay. Well, first of all, I felt I wanted to write the book because it was the actual death of my father 3 years ago that triggered this for me. I've always had an interest and a belief that there is an afterlife. There is something other than what we see here in the physical world, and that this isn't all that there is. And so, obviously, my father did not have a near-death experience. He had a full transition. But it put me on the path of wanting to find out what is it that people experience when they have these kind of events. So it took me about 1.5 years to write, actually a little bit longer than I wanted to write, because I was going through the grieving process of my father. And I know for sure that consciousness survives, not only because of what the subjects in the book have relayed to me through my research, but I have communication with my father on the other side, and it's very frequent. I know it may not sound odd to you. It may sound not odd to your listeners. Some might find it a little odd, but it's the absolute truth. I have communication, and what he does is he's told me basically that consciousness does survive on the other side, and he switches the light on in one of my guest bedrooms every month without fail. And he's been doing it for 2.5 years. There's only 2 months this year he's not done that, and I don't know why. It was the month of February and the month of September.
How do you know it's him?
I'm sorry, George?
How do you know it's him?
I have, I should say, 2 very good spiritualist medium friends in the UK that I've been friends with for some 30 years. And one of them actually told me the specific day my dad would pass. And I was here in the United States at the time. Yeah. And she said to me, your dad is he's going to make a transition soon into the spirit world. He's being prepared. My dad had a heart issue and he had kidney issues. And my dad was 83 and he'd never had a surgery in his life, George. He was very healthy. And I thought, you know what? My dad's going to get over this. My dad is not going to transition. And she kept giving me a gentle nudge by email and telling me, you've got to get on a flight and you've got to come to the UK and see your dad. Well, I did. And I managed to get a direct flight from McCarran Airport all the way to Manchester, because my parents lived outside of Manchester. And that was on the 13th of November of 2017 to the 19th. And I could only go for the week because we had 3 cats. And so we had to have somebody come taking care of our pets. And so then, the person taking care of the cats had to then go on business. So I could only be there for a week. Well, it was very, how could I say? It was very timely that I was able to go for the week, because it was actually the last week. And one of my friends told me that, on November the 20th, your dad looks like he's going to pass. Well, I had to leave the UK on the 19th to come home. And my dad did actually pass on the 20th. I couldn't stay any longer. And sometimes, when psychic mediums give information like this with specific dates, sometimes they don't always come to pass. Nothing is 100%, even though she is extremely accurate, and she was in that case. But when it had happened to me, I had a conversation with them, two of my friends, because I was reading a book called Into the Light, which is written by a doctor of 2 care hospices in Texas, Dr. John Lerma. And he talks about what people see 3 to 5 days before passing who are terminally ill. And it's deceased loved ones and it's angels. And so I was reading a chapter in the book that I was engrossed in. And this particular lady who had stomach cancer was telling the doctor one morning that she wanted to ask a couple of questions. And one was, why was she being visited by loved ones, deceased loved ones? And he told her in so many words, because he didn't want to speed up the process of her death, that, you know what, Mildred, maybe they're just popping in to check on you like I do every morning and just making sure you're okay. She says, well, okay, Dr. Lerma, but let me ask you another question. Why am I seeing angels? So she then described these angels, and she said, well, they always stand in a particular corner of the room. They reach such height of the ceiling, which I think in a care hospice can be no higher than 9 feet. They're pretty low in care hospices, especially in the UK, I know for sure. And she said they always illuminate a bright light internally that reflects outwardly, like a light bulb. And she said, we cannot communicate with you, Mildred. You have to initiate the communication for us to do that. And so she tried it and it worked, and they made communication with her. Well, at that point, George, I was so flabbergasted by what I was reading. And I was in my guest bedroom at the time. And I sat back on my chair and I said, oh my God, I wish my angels would talk to me. I would love for my angels to talk to me. Boom, the light went out. And so I sat there for a moment. I wasn't afraid, because I've had a lot of very strange phenomena happen to me over my life. And I waited for something to happen. Nothing did. So I then decided to put the book away, and I would read it again the next day. And as I got up off the chair, I didn't walk halfway past the bed, and boom, the light came back on. So I knew somebody wanted to talk with me. I didn't know who it was. I scooted up to the bed. I said, I don't know who you are. I don't know if it's you, my angels, wanting to talk with me, or if it's you, Dad. But I have to thank you for doing that, because I know it takes an awful lot of energy to do what you've just done. So I'm very appreciative please feel free to visit me again. Cut a long story short, my friend said to me, this is not the work of angels, Tracy. Angels do not need to flip lights on and off to get attention. They are of a much higher realm. This is your dad making communication with you. And so I've had many of the signs along the way, George: feathers, pennies. He sends me hummingbirds. He sends me dragonflies. And I've heard my father leave messages on EVPs.
You know, a lot of current research involves looking back at the work that's been done in previous centuries. In the 18th and 19th centuries, the elite academics, the finest minds of those times, were interested in this, pursued it through mediums, trying to establish communication, and had some success and wrote about it. Then, you know, over the years, there have been so many mediums that have been exposed as fraudulent. Science in general has turned its back on this, the public as well. Now, it feels like it's turning a corner because of near-death experiences. The research into NDEs, some of that is very compelling. I find it very compelling when someone says they've been somewhere else and they have a particular point of view in which they see things that they could not have seen otherwise. They're aware of things that are confirmed in the physical reality. You've got some of those in your book coming up, right?
I have, yes. I have a number of subjects who have had near-death experiences. Some have actually had, they don't know whether to call it an NDE. They are on the fence whether it's an NDE or an OBE. Now, the two are very similar. And I suggest in the book that NDEs are actually a subcategory of an OBE, but it's more of a forced out-of-body experience due to traumatic situations, whether it's a cardiac arrest, whether it's an intense accident, vehicle accident, a drowning, or even if it's something like childbirth, for example. It's a forced out-of-body experience due to trauma. They do have similarities of, you know, being outside the body, floating outside of the body and looking down on their own physical body. But there are also differences as well, like I said, where NDEs are only really more of a traumatic experience. I've never had an NDE personally. I've had an OBE, so I can relate to some degree, but I've never actually been to that place that my subjects talk about, which is the tunnel of light and, the tunnel, seeing the light, seeing deceased loved ones or anything like that.
We have about 2 minutes left in our time, a lot of time, Tracy. Let me ask you this. You write in the book about EVOX, this device that's been developed by some researchers in Arizona that is like a spirit phone, which is, you know, Tesla and Edison were both working on a spirit phone when they died. It was the last big project for both of them. Is this legit?
It's absolutely legit. And I can tell you wholeheartedly here, George, that these two people, Tony and Sherry Rathman, they're husband and wife. They are a phenomenal paranormal investigations team that live in Arizona. I first interviewed them in 2018 on my radio show with KGRA. And Tony, I should say, had built the box, EVOX, the very first EVOX. And last September, I asked Tony very kindly if he would try to do an experiment to reach my dad. And this is how the whole thing opened up. And I know we're short on time here, so I'll get to the point of it. But I'd heard my dad at one time actually just say the word yes when Tony asked if he was present. I heard my dad very strongly say yes. And then I sent Tony an email with a photograph of me and my dad together when my parents had visited me on my birthday a number of years ago, 2012, I believe it was. And so I sent Tony the photograph just so he could see what my dad looked like. He has never met my dad. And so I didn't know that Tony was going to do an experiment with it. So he switched on the EVOX, which he's built, as I said. And when he does that, you can actually, I've heard it with my own ears, spirit actually flock to the box. And they even address Tony by his name. Hey, Tony, or hi, Tony. And it's unbelievable. And he has this certain relationship with them. And so he said, and I heard it all on audio, I'm looking for a specific gentleman of the name Dan Austin. And so I'd like the spirits to move away from the box. And Dan, if you can hear me, I have a photograph here. You should know who's in this photograph, because one of these people is you. And I'm a very good friend of, your daughter. This is how we started off. Very good friend of your daughter. She would like to receive some type of message from you. So I'm holding up this photograph. Who's in it? And you hear my father say, "That's me daughter."
That's a great story. There's so many more in the book. When it is out late in December, we'll have you come back. We'll continue the conversation. Tracy, thank you very much.
Thank you, George. So again, you can find out more about Tracie Austin at thetraciaustenshow.com. Tracy is spelled Tracie. That's all one word, thetraciaustenshow.com. And to hear more from Shannon LeGro, check out intothefrayradio.com. Into the Fray Radio, one word, with Fray being spelled F-R-A-Y. So until next time, I'm Duncan Phoenix, and be sure to check out MysteryWire.com daily. Follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. Till next time.
MysteryWire.com, home of the unusual and unknown. From Area 51 to the paranormal, it's your source to the most vetted UFO stories and special investigations in the world. Take a journey into the universe of MysteryWire.com.